that is not related to do it is either under NDA or really old. So, fortunately, I have lots of stuff that's tied to it. But I'm also going to be talking about the animation software and some of the more technical stuff. So I want it to be more broad in terms of reach, because I think that lots of people lots of people like it, but don't love it. So I don't want to alienate them by trying to make it about My Little Pony. So I have 2 minutes. Just checking out my slides so I don't forget anything. Oh, what the hell was that? Oh, right. Should get a better cable by the hard drive. Alright, 2:30, let's get started. So, welcome to Minty's Animation Workshop. As a disclaimer, may contain traces of ponies. There's a lot of My Little Pony stuff in my stuff. This is not about ponies. It just happens that a lot of the things that I have is either under NDA or is really old, so I don't want to show a catalog of stuff that might be outdated. So, let's start from the beginning, shall we? So January 1993, I was born. Nothing of substance really happened since then, besides the fact that my parents did the mistake of putting me in front of a computer, and I discovered animation tools because I had no friends. I was very, very introverted. Back in the days where the word introverted was not part of the lexicon, I was basically just called a nerd. I'm still called a nerd, but now it's a good thing, so I'm not going to complain. So I ended up going to BronyCon 2013 to show some of the computer animation stuff I learned. I used to look like that. I mean, I'm mostly looking like that, but longer hair. So I did my own start with Flash animation. I ended up doing a lot of cool stuff since. I ended up going to École NAD, an animation school in Montreal. They hate it when you call it Centre NAD, but I will still keep doing it. And to give you a good idea of what kind of culture you get out of the school, this used to look like this with the pipes at the ceiling. And animation schools, a lot of people have that. They probably have that one vision of the animation school that they see from the more prestigious ones. And the key thing I keep thinking of whenever I talk about animation schools, like, don't go there just because it looks prestigious. Look for the animation school that will teach you the skill that you want for the industry. For example, I looked at the portfolio that they had, all the cool things that they could do, and then I realized, like, I could do things like that. I want to do things like that. And I ended up doing, I first started with live action, so I did some live actions projects, including VFX for Aquaman and Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. And then COVID happened, and during COVID, a lot of animation productions started ramping up, and live action projects were really struggling. I ended up getting some live action projects in the middle of COVID, but I ended up getting a couple of projects, including, Scuba Holiday Hunt, one of the productions that got canceled at the end of production. So even though the production is done and I still can't talk about it, it's really frustrating. I ended up working on a couple of episodes of Supergiant Robot Brothers, an animated series on Netflix that is rendered entirely in Unreal Engine. You're going to have some productions that use Unreal Engine to do some previs, but they rarely actually do the final pixel in that one, and that one was quite interesting because that was actually done final pixel in Unreal, and there's a couple of stuff under NDA. Unfortunately, NDAs, I cannot breach them because it would be really a bad look for me, it would be a bad look for the studio, and I'd rather just be patient and just wait until I can actually talk about it. But I can talk about a lot of fan stuff I also did on YouTube that you can see right now. And it's quite interesting because I was invited in a couple of projects that were not tied to My Little Pony. They were tied to fandoms I were not specifically caring about, but I had some projects I was really, really excited to see. Built in the 80s, the whole idea was based on Five Nights at Freddy's, and I didn't specifically like it. But when they told me, like, you're going to get to do, like, 80s neon stuff for an animated music video, I was thinking, like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I also worked with Wime Time, who was actually in the Brony fandom, but he asked me, like, could you do like something that's tied to Undertale? I didn't get to do a sprite animation in forever, so I got to do my own for that one. So I was really excited. So that's just some of the more recent stuff. So let's talk first about Flash animation. Flash animation got a very bad reputation. You're going to see a lot of reviewers who talk about Flash animation as a bad thing. Unfortunately, it's very pejorative, the idea that they look at a cartoon that has cheap animation and they say, like, this is Flash animation. And a lot of the time they actually get it wrong. There's a lot of cartoons that were animated with different software that they ended up just pointing out, like, this looks like Flash animation. Flash animation deserves its bad reputation, but not for that. They had to basically get rid of Flash as a platform because the whole idea with Adobe was that they were looking at Flash as a vector animation tool that you could use to develop a lot of things online. And the whole idea was Flash was, for example, you make games or interactive content that you look at from your web browser. The whole idea was really impressive back then because since it was vector based, it wouldn't take as big of a file as a JPEG, for example, to convey the same idea. So you'd have a lot of websites would be driven by Flash because you could do a lot of crazy things. The problem is that since the whole thing was not open source and the whole thing was really strict by one company, a lot of it was just riddled with security nightmares. And the whole idea is that since it could do vector animation, you had lots of studios that were doing animation when they found out that they could use that to do just digital inking and digital coloring. They could actually use Flash for that, and then they realized that they could actually do rigged animation out of it. So the whole idea when they killed Flash, they actually didn't kill it. They finally realized that they could actually use that as an animation software for animated productions when it was too late for everything else. And what they did is that they renamed it to Adobe Animate, which is the worst name ever for an animation software because you're going to ask, like, what did you use to animate it? And then you're going to reply, I just animate. And that's bland as a name. At least Flash has something to it. If you remember back in the days, for example, Miniclip, a lot of it was Flash-based games. Not all of it, but the idea to just have those as interactive content meant a lot of people were really curious about it. And in my case, I was very curious to find out. My dad had a book about that thick that was basically just filled with things about Flash as a web platform, and then it had a trial for Flash in it. So I thought, well, let's try myself on that. So I'm just going to show you a bit of it. It's not the old version of Flash that I'm going to be showing. It's a newer one, but let's be real, they haven't changed a lot since. So let's make sure I have. So actually, I was not going to that one first. So the whole idea with Flash is very simple. You have all those vector tools, and are you freaking out right now? There we go. So the whole idea with vector tools is that you can actually change those points. You can actually make curves, and with those curves, for example, you have. Oh, I think it's my. I think Flash is freaking out right now. Let's see if I can. Yeah, I hope I didn't make it crash. Oh, I think I made Flash panic.
Of course, in the third group we call it dead panics.
You know what? I'll restart it. I'm gonna have to go improv because a lot of those files that was gonna show later, I'm gonna have to reopen myself. At At least I remember where I left them. So that's the thing I keep forgetting about. Let's see. Can I open up Adobe Animate? So the whole idea with Flash as a platform is that it's a software that's been running since 1993, and because of that, a lot of it is antiquated. They did get rid of a lot of things that used to be there. Let's see. We're live. None of that is pre-recorded, and that's kind of on me. Actually, while this is loading, I guess I can show you one of the projects I've had that I wanted to show. Desktop. Where's TrotCon? This one. Open with. There we go. So this is not Flash, but this will be relevant later.
I need you to take this letter to Twilight Sparkle in Ponyville right away. This is an emergency. Equestria depends on it.
I will do what I can.
You have to do your best.
So, this will be more relevant later. I should have shown that before introducing Flash, but that's my fault. That's so let's there we go. So let's make sure it actually works. There we go. It actually works. So one key thing with that is that you can actually have the whole idea is that it's vector based. So the whole idea is that you have those points and you can zoom as much as you want on those points. You will never see a pixel unless you actually import this image. You can actually do that, for example, if you want to do some crazier things. The whole idea with that is that you can then convert those elements to symbols, and what you can do then is that you have keyframes, and with those keyframes you can actually interpolate. And the whole idea with that is that with those elements, like you already introduce a lot of interpolated images in your sequence. For example, if you just want an object that just goes from one point to the other, and then you create a blank keyframe and it stops existing. It can be anything. It can be a body part, it can be a vehicle, it can be a prop. You can put all of those, and then you have your layers. And the whole idea is that you can create those blank keyframes and then introduce them on top, for example. And it just follows the timeline underneath. And then you have the symbol here, and if you want in the symbol, you can actually have things that are actually happening to that shape. For example, if I want to have in that another keyframe for a shape tween, you can actually put a shape tween. The whole idea with the shape tween is that it takes all the points you have for your objects at those 2 points, and it actually interpolates between those points to keep it. And shape tweens have a lot of faults, but it can actually do a lot of crazy things I'll show later. So open recent. Let's see. So with Flash animation, if you're gonna do for example, a flash rig, actually I say flash rig, a lot of animators that I talk to that actually doing that as for a living, they're telling me they're not called rigs, they're called builds. But I'm working from a 3D mindset, so I'm calling them rigs, and there's no animation police to actually stop me, so I will do what I want. So for example, with those pieces, like those pieces are basically simply vector based, so you can actually zoom on them without seeing the artifacts. You can skew them as you want. You can rotate, you can scale, and all of it comes down to the way that you can interpolate them. And of course, you don't need to interpolate. You can actually have frame by frame. For example, you're going to have cycles, and it's quite interesting with those flash rigs. Like all those pieces, they correspond to a symbol that has a specific frame. And for example, if you want to, you can change the frame from the picker to actually have a different pose. It's really helpful if you want to have something that goes really fast. For example, characters that's going from one pose to the other. It's so much easier to just have all those poses ready. It's not perfect. You're probably going to have to make your own for a couple of key situations, for example. But just having them ready like that is incredible. For example, if you want to have a character that's talking, like just the fact that you have all the mouth poses they can switch between just to do lip sync instead of having to redraw all of those pieces is great. So the whole idea is that you basically have with your symbol, you're going to have the frame picker. The whole idea is that you can, for example, set it to a single frame of that symbol. It's the whole idea is it's nested, so you're going to see that hierarchy here. And basically, for example, if you want this mount, you're going to have to go 6. So you set 6, and it's at that point. If you want to have blinks, instead of having to redraw them every single time, it's just a cycle that you just go through. If you want, for example, to have some effects, for example, there's a magic effect for the horn that you can engage or not. And the whole magic effect is literally just a loop. And just having that loop that you're going to reuse every time is so much easier. You're going to have, for example, within a lot of shows, for example, whenever you have a character walking, they're just going to reuse the same cycle. So, for example, you're going to have, let's zoom out, you're going to have the front cycle, and if you count, it's 24 frames, which is quite, since it runs at 24 frames per second, it's 1 second for the loop. And it's divided by 24, not just because it's 1 second, but it's also the fact that you can divide it so much better. So if you're going to be at the middle of the cycle, it's actually just the same cycle but flipped. And for example, if you look at the way that this leg, for example, moves, it's literally just a loop where it goes forward for half of the cycle and then backward. And then the other one is just half a cycle late. And it's literally just 4 key positions, like where you have the position the furthest away. You have the position where it goes really high in the middle, and then you have the position the closest away, and then you have something right in the middle, and then you just switch between those 4 for that kind of cycle. And the back legs are basically the same idea, but shifted by a quarter of a cycle. And the whole idea then is that since the head is its own symbol, you want to have a character, you can have the character just talk while walking. And basically just those cycles. You're going to have run cycle, you're going to have walk cycles from all those different angles. If you have a character that has wings, for example, you can just have that as a cycle that you animate. And for example, as I showed earlier, for example, some more complex rigs, what they're going to have is they're going to have a 360 that's going to be there. So for example, if you have a character that has to turn their head, instead of actually just having to switch between different head, you can just switch between different frames. For example, let's for example just copy those frames. You copy this here, and the whole idea is that you have the animation that starts at that frame, and then you copy, for example, I'm going to copy this one, and we're just putting here. I'm going to sync it up to 51. There we go. And for example, if within the animation you have the character turning their head, instead what you can have is, let's go with just this angle. You can just copy this pose, and it just switches between the two. And then you're probably going to have to do something that's slightly fancier than just switching between 2 poses. But that's part of the animation process itself. And it's quite interesting. Let's see, for example, what kind of crazy things you can do when you get to that. Please don't do that to me, please. There we go. So for example, I'm going to disable everything because this is a laptop, so it's not... let's change it. Oh, it's already said it's fast. Disable everything but the character. And then you're going to have the scene where the character is bowing down. And the whole idea is that you have, as I showed earlier, when you have those tweens. Oh yeah, it's also a problem with Flash. It really loves doing the auto recovery thing. For example, you have the way that the way that you're going to interpolate just to try to get smoother motion. But for example, the head is doing its own thing inside. So there we go. So it bows down, and as it bows down, it also has its own motion as it goes down. Again, you can see also some of the notes I had just to basically tell myself what kind of motion I have to do. And the whole idea was that the horn was supposed to do a circle. And then started going up. And one of the problems that you have with Flash that I'm going to show back on this rig, for example. Because a lot of people are going to point out that Flash is stiff, and the whole reason Flash is stiff is the fact that what you're going to have whenever you do animation is that nothing is parented together. So all of it, you're going to have to animate both parts at once and just expect to have to do all that manual work, and all that manual work is going to waste a lot of time that you could spend on doing anything to make it look less stiff. For example, if you have pieces, the only deformations you can really have is deforming by skewing, rotating, scaling. So you're going to have to try to make stuff that is meant to be stiff and make it look less stiff, which is quite a nightmare, and I'll be covering a bit how Harmony doesn't do that. Flash can be really crazy. For example, there was a scene that was showing for another project where the whole idea was that we didn't have the time to actually make it in 3D. And the whole idea was that we needed some perspective. The whole idea is that you have characters and they're singing as you have a background in the back. And the whole idea is that instead of just what we're supposed to do, just scale it back to kind of have some kind of sense of perspective, what you can do instead is that you have all those pieces that actually follow the perspective. And I was thinking at first, like, how could I actually do it? And there's a technique I found out that is so simple, yet I can't believe I didn't think of it at first. So if you look, for example, at those patterns on the floor. So the whole idea is that is simply just pieces that are scaling at a very specific rate. And let's hide it. So you have this that follows. It's basically just this piece that's supposed to scale, and you have a custom ease. And the whole idea is that you basically just curve it like that. And the whole idea is it follows the inverse square law, because you're gonna have objects that are gonna go farther away from the perspective. And the whole idea is that instead of just having those elements that are going to be farther away just be scaled back, what you can do instead of use what I was showing earlier, what you can actually have a symbol that's offset in time. Usually when you have the symbols offset in time, for example, it's basically just changing them out to a different piece. But what you can do instead is telling it, like, be at that specific frame when you start, to simply tell it, like, be that farther away. And what you do then is that you have a pattern made of pieces, and then you have masks. And the idea of a mask is that a mask is basically, for example, this piece, and what it does is that anything that's inside of that shape is reproduced, and that's it. So for example, if you want to cut out a specific aspect, for example, the mask, if you have eyes, for example, you don't want the inside of the eye to go outside, and what you do is that you set it in a mask like that, and it just covers it. and you don't have to worry about it. The only problem is that you need to lock the layers to be able to see your work, or you need to go outside, but that's Flash being Flash. Toon Boom doesn't actually have that issue that I'll cover later. So you can actually get that kind of sense of perspective, and basically you build those shapes by simply combining those layers together. You can also have, where's this one? Where's my shot? 41. For example, if you're going to have some more complex character animation, just the way that you do the key poses, and you interpolate between them. A lot of it, they do talk about tweened animation, but the problem with tween animation is that it only gives you the bare minimum that you're going to have to work with. It's basically just the computers that are complete doing the half of the work. So, for example, you can see, for example, all the notes I had to make just for how I would make the character animation work. And all of it is basically just hand-drawn pieces, give me a guide. And you can see, for example, the layers. For example, the main, that to be tweened to try to get something smooth. And then you can see how some of the pieces, just to try to get some squash, by taking the shape and really skewing it and scaling it in a weird way, just to get the animation. And then you get a nice bounce back. And one of the tricks I learned from a better animator than me is the idea that when you do a bounce back, you have some pieces that follow first, and you have the rest that follows after, a couple of frames later. So for example, the head goes down, and then the body takes a bit before it goes down. I was described it as thinking of it like a chain, where the part that actually does a motion follows first, and then the rest follows after. So just having, so that's part of Flash, but I want to cover a bit of Toon Boom as well. Actually, I'm going to cover Flash a bit later if you want me to cover more specifics, but let's go back to slideshow. So there's Toon Boom already. Like, it's made in Montreal, as a fun fact. They use that for a lot of shows. It's pretty good because you can actually do that to do traditional animation, but it's also incredible for rig-based animation, which is pretty good for me because I'm not that good at drawing. So just the idea of having a tool to be able to actually have characters do the motion I want on my own without having to fight over it is incredible. Actually, I'm not going to cover Blender yet. So, for example, here's a Toon Boom rig. Here's a reference I had to make it. And the whole idea with Toon Boom is that you have the same idea with the interface. You have all the layers in the back here. But those layers, instead of having being connected in the same way where you have just a piece and nothing else follows, you have a lot more flexibility. So for example, you have those tools, like, for example, the deformers. So you have the deformer here that if you look at the node graph, and that Flash doesn't have, you simply just plug those nodes to everything else you want. So it's basically just the curve with the offset here. So it's plugged to that curve, that's plugged to kinematic output, to the controller for the head. And the idea with that is that if you want to move the neck, the head follows. It's incredible that Adobe took forever to actually implement it, and when they implemented it, they got it wrong. So just being able to actually have the motion of the head follow is a godsend. It's incredible how much time I just saved not having to sync up the animation. Because, for example, you might want to just move it slightly, because sometimes, for example, you have the head that needs to be a bit further in the front, further back. If you have to do it manually, it's a nightmare. It's also a 3D software, which means that you've seen a bit earlier when I had the character animation where I had to manually move every single piece of the head just to try to give them some perspective. Well, with Toon Boom, it's kind of hacky. It's not actually the way that they intend to do it. They have a thing called Master Controller for that, but I can actually rotate it. And the whole idea is it's simply an assembly of 3D pieces set in, well, 2D pieces set in 3D space, and it's incredible. And it's not perfect. For example, if I go past a certain point, it breaks. So it's not a 3D rig, but the best way I can describe it is a 2D rig with some of the advantages of 3D, but the appeal of 2D. And of course, with deformers, you can actually have different functions. For example, you have the mouth. I was showing earlier, you have the lip sync. Just the idea that you can have all the pieces that you can work around. But the whole idea with Toon Boom is that everything can be a deformer. So I can just have the mouth just open its own and it follows those deformers. So for example, if I want to have something that's a bit more specific, why is my hard drive always panicking? For example, have a shot where you have a character screaming and thinking like, no, and thinking that's not a very interesting shape for someone who's screaming at the top of their lungs. So the key thing is that you take those 2 points, and just by moving them in a more interesting way, it changes everything. And it's also pretty interesting because with those kinematic outputs, for example, I plugged it to that kinematic output that's going to be plugged to the bottom teeth and the tongue. So the whole idea is that I can then just move them around to my will. And they might be connected together, but if I want, for example, to move it on its own, it can move it on its own, which is pretty good. If, for example, you want to have the character show their teeth because of anger, for example, it makes it so much easier. And of course, you can also have the blinks that are also done with deformers, which can really help. You can have the hair that's also done by deformers. So when you were looking earlier at that sequence where you had the wind all blowing all over the place, just the fact that it was done with deformers made it so much easier to just animate. And of course, for example, you have some nodes that you can implement. For example, I love that node because it's so simple, yet I'm baffled that Flash didn't have it. It's called Shake, and the whole idea is it simply just makes it shake. So if you want to have a source of chaos, and then you have the, for example, if you want something that's going a bit slower, you can change it like this. So for example, if you have some wind and you want to add some chaos to the animation you've already done, it makes so much better. Or you have a character that's shaking and you want to add a bit more on top of it. And of course, if you want, all of it is things that you can just plug and unplug. For example, there's an ortho-lock, and all you have the ortho-lock. You've played Super Mario 64. Remember those trees are simply just 2D images of the tree that just always faces you? Yep, it's basically just that, but with a piece. So the whole idea, for example, is that I want my hair to always look the same from all the angles. So just putting an ortho-lock always makes it work. But if I don't want it, what I can do instead is I simply take the ortho-lock and just disable it just by pressing D. And now it doesn't do the thing I didn't want it to do. And just having that as an option, just having that kind of node that's not too tight, just helps. I have nodes, for example, image switches. The whole idea is that you have 2 inputs and 1 output, and you basically tell between the 2. So for example, if I want to have a different hairstyle because of a different angle, you can just switch it like this. The eyes are also parented to pegs, and the whole idea with pegs is that they're always going to follow that kind of movement. And of course, this one's connected to... Seriously? There we go. So this one's connected to the pegs for both eyes. So for example, if I want to have the eyes for the 2 eyes to follow at the same time, I can. But for example, if there's something at a very specific angle, I can just connect to this one, and it works. And of course, it's all set in 3D space, so you have some crazy things you can actually do with it. So at first I was trying to do, you know those cool shots where you have 2D animated characters on top of 3D environments? Actually, I'm going to show you what it looks like in the final one first. I should have clipped that one shot before doing it, but There we go. So the method I had back then, that project, was brute force. The whole idea is that I had to manually track a 3D element that I animated in a 3D scene that was separate. So you have the camera movement, and then you have the character that's animated on top to try to match the perspective. And it worked pretty decently because I knew exactly what part I wanted to follow the most. So you have the circle here that was actually matching. Let's plug it front so you can, and the whole idea is it's matching this circle here and just matching that one, and then matching the legs make it so much easier. And just the fact that the character didn't have to walk also helped. And then just try to match with the rotation of the head, and then you can see all the parts where I didn't care because it was all out of the frame, and perfectly fine to not care about the outside of the frame. Unless you have someone who keeps telling you to change the camera position, you shouldn't have to worry about that. And I have to admit I'm kind of guilty of second guessing myself with that kind of things, but let's be real, just changing it a bit, like, it's not the end of the world for that kind of production if you know what you're doing. So you have the camera movement, and you can also see that the outline is not actually generated on the character. It's actually generated part by a set of layers, and all they do with the set of layers is that you can also see that it's spaghetti. The whole idea is that you have all those cutters to basically just mask out everything, and then you have, where's the matte? Let's see. There we go. There's a thing called matte resize. The whole idea is you can shrink or just expand the outline of a piece. And the idea is that you then set it with a cutter with a shape that has the color of the outline. And it's not perfect. Let's render that one frame. But you're going to notice it gives an automated outline that you can just reuse. And it works fine enough for my needs. So, but that was the approach I had before, and it dawned on me until very late that since Toon Boom actually helps you import 3D models, you can just do the whole 3D in Toon Boom. So you have this one scene. Actually, I'm going to also show what this scene... I'm clumsy right now. So... there we go. So the whole idea is that I wanted to have originally it was supposed to be 3 separate shots of a character walking and then casting a spell. And then I realized when I was looking at the animatic, like, all of it could just combine into a single one if I can do camera movement. So I did. So you have the first shot. It was supposed to be that camera panning a bit, and then you see her walking from a distance. And then transitions to another shot. And the whole idea that at the time was when I realized that since you can actually do it within Toon Boom, the whole idea is that you have then the character that's animated. You have all the layers that you're going to export. In this case, I'm also going to cover a bit of compositing, but the whole idea is that you have aspects. For example, beauty is basically just a diffuse pass of the character with nothing. Outline is literally just the outline and everything else is in black. The eye is a pass just for the eyes where separate aspects are in separate colors to isolate it. S shadow for self shadow. It's basically just when you paint a shadow with a specific color, and basically you just isolate that color later to composite. This one is, oh yeah, just the horn itself, just to isolate it, to put a glow on it. Ground shadow, that's basically just, you take the animation and using, it's called apply peg transform. The idea is that you take an animation and you apply just a deformation to it that's separate to the animation. You can use it, for example, if you want a reflection on the floor. And you can also combine it with a couple of other things, and with that, I could basically take the animation, skew it from the angle, and get a shadow that would match the perspective, and I just painted it a separate color, and then you export it separately. And all of it just follows in a scene with perspective. That's kind of a mess when you look at it. And then you have the camera that's and all it is, the camera is following this that actually gives a transformation to follow in the scene. The fact that you have the camera here is very helpful because you can actually use that. In this specific case, I exported the camera coordinates to Blender to actually render the background path separately. I'm gonna not show it for that one shot because it's a bit more complex for what I need. Actually, I'm gonna show it for this specific shot where you have the character's animation that's with some simple camera movement. You have the reflection that's basically done by the fact that the animation is done in 3D space with those 2D pieces, so you can just flip it and the reflection matches in perspective. It does require a bit more work to get the pieces to line up because sometimes you're going to have some pieces that are a bit closer to camera just to get the right look. In this case, you need to be very specific with the angle that those pieces are going to have. But it was not a very complex animated shot, so I didn't have to worry too much about it. I guess I can show that one as well. Well, actually, yeah, I can basically show you what you get. Where you have the animation for the 3D prop that I matched with the hand, try to make it pull down, and just having that approach, just I had to then match it manually within Blender. But the key idea is that you have the character animation done with the perspective of the camera, and then you can have some more interesting things going on. So you export all those layers, and the idea is that there. And the whole idea is that you can then combine in software, for example, like After Effects. And, for example, you have, let's open up this one. So you have your diffuse pass. And the whole idea with this diffuse pass is that's literally just the render that you get out of Toon Boom. You apply a tint to match the lighting of the scene. You're going to have the shadow layer that I was talking about that was a separate color that I isolated using a node called color override. That all it is that you tell a color like, don't be this specific index color they had, be pure white, and then you can isolate it. This one is literally just the same. Actually, no, this one is the outline that just subtracted, and then with some kind of blur to basically have the outline be slightly blurry to kind of create some ambient occlusion. And then a second pass. This one is quite interesting. The idea is that you call it, it's offset lighting, and the whole idea is that you have this piece where it's literally just the shape of the character that's used as a mask, well, in this specific case, an inverted mask, to a specific version of the same rig, the same piece that's brighter and warmer to get the light from the back. It's not perfect, but actually can give incredible rim light for cheap. And then you have, when I was talking a bit earlier, the pass with the eyes. Can I? There. And the eyes is basically just a map with those colors. It's R, G, and B. So you have the red pass that's just, for example, the sclera and the iris. And then you have green and blue that's used for the reflection at the bottom, and the blue that's used for the shine. And the way that you can do that now is that you can just use that as a way to mask the original color, and you can actually have For example, because I realized when I was doing animation before that I was putting the shading effect on top of the glow that you had in the eye of the character and looked fake, looked kind of plasticky. So just having the option to actually have the shine that's actually brighter than the character without having to worry about the tint made it so much easier. And then you just brighten that a bit just to get more attention to that. And this was basically just a mask. Well, they call it stencil, but the whole idea is basically just covering up if there's some edges with that. And then you combine it with the rest of the animation. So for example, you have, in specific case, it's quite funny, I needed to have some water for there was a river behind. So it's literally just stock footage of some water that's placed then you blur it a bit. It's kind of subtle, but and then you put on top the 3D render. This that comes out from Blender, rendered out of Eevee. I'll cover it really quickly. Eevee, think of it like a video game renderer. It cheats a lot. Actually, I'm going to do it right now. So, for example, if I want to have reflections, so for example, I'm going to have this. There we go. So I'm gonna set the roughness, gonna make it really shiny. So for example, you're gonna have ray tracing. That one's done in screen space. Let's make it brighter because the projector is not the best. There we go. There we go. So it's gonna be very bright, and I'm gonna darken a bit the background just to make sure. There we go. So you can see a bit the reflection from the ground that's done in screen space. And what I mean by done in screen space, it means that you've probably seen that in video games. It's especially for floor reflections, and it's very prevalent in first-person shooter games. The idea is that it's done in screen space, so if you don't look at the piece, it doesn't show in the reflections, which means you can see the reflections just die as it's covered. You have some tools, for example, to try to mitigate that. The idea that you put a plane on the floor, and then you cover it at the right place. And the whole idea with that is basically it just creates a second camera to get those to get the reflections working. A lot of video games would do that like that. And the reason why people really like working with Eevee is that it's fast, but the result is going to get they're not accurate. So the bounce of lights nowadays is done in screen space. It's kind of a facsimile of what you'd get of the real deal. For example, if you actually switch to cycles. But you're going to notice right away the reason, like it starts very grainy and it takes a while to get new samples just to get something that looks good. If you have interiors, for example, where you have lights coming from outside that bounces everywhere, the whole idea is it's basically a stochastic path tracing algorithm. So it basically just traces all the possibilities of rays that you get, and it just starts to average it to the common ground, but the ground truth. So it takes a lot of samples just to get to the result. You have the denoise function, but you're going to notice that the denoise function also creates some weird artifacts that look like AI generated images, because technically it's AI based, but it's not generative AI. So it's not perfect, but it's one of those things. Like Blender can actually give that nowadays with those tools, which also matches with the next frame. Blender is free. It's pretty good too. It used to be a mess, like before 2.8, whenever you needed to select something, you need to right click it for some reason. There was no reason for it to be like that. I think it's based on the fact it was based for Unix before that. Scanline renderer was worse than Mental Ray, which was pretty bad. They got bought up by NVIDIA, and like a year after they bought it, they just shut it down. So I think they just gave up on that one. You can set textures for specular roughness, and you're going to notice a lot of objects have varying specular roughness. For example, the best example I can think of is whenever you have puddles of water on a floor, if you want to do it in 3D, you basically just have the roughness that just varies in that spot. So it's really rough on everything but the part where it's wet. And since you couldn't do that with Blender, you'd have to cheat and try to put a spot of water, and you get some weird cutoff. So it was not really, it wasn't really good for that. Real-time render, for example, for the viewport, I couldn't get it to actually get shadow maps. And for example, shadow maps, they use that a lot. If, for example, if you want to see if you put a spotlight to place for a character and see like how is it going to affect the character and is the shadow going to be at a specific place. It's not perfect, but it's a good facsimile of what you're going to expect to work with. But Blender didn't even have that, so you had to actually render it to get the result. The interface was a mess. You're going to see a lot of buttons that have labels that don't need it. Lots of functions at the bottom that are redundant. And then you wonder, like, why is it like that? Some of the features were set in weird order as well. Yeah, a lot of it was bad, but they moved to 2.8 with those two renders. When I was talking about Eevee, the fact that it just gives a facsimile that's you're gonna have pixelated shadows if you put them low res. Screen space reflections, the environment lights. For example, if you put a sky and you just, for example, there's a sun on your sky picture, the whole idea is it just ignores any form of occlusion. So, for example, you have a roof that blocks it, it's not actually gonna block it. And it was really annoying because if I had to do night scenes, but you had houses, and if you look at the interior of the house, even though they were supposed to be really dark, you could actually see the stuff from inside. So I had to cheat to make them darker, or actually put some kind of light from the inside of the house. And since back then you had the limitation of the amount of lights you could have, so I had like 300 houses, but I could only have 128 lights at the same time. So after I think after 90 they would stop having shadows, and after 128 they would just stop working as lights. So I had to have some stuff that would glow but would not emit any light and everything else. With cycles, you need a good graphics card. It's doing that kind of path tracing, kind of like what Pixar does or any animation studio does nowadays. Besides, I think there's some studios that might want to avoid it if they want to do stylized render. But even then, like, it does incredible reflections. It's very, very accurate, but it's hard to cheat with it. And it takes forever to get those frames. For example, at 24 frames per second, you're gonna have had some cases where I had to budget my time and tell myself, like, I'm gonna have 2 weeks to render that. Can I render it while I'm sleeping? And then I realized, like, my computer is making the worst sound ever, and I'm like room next to it, and I kind of had to sleep through all of that. So, and sometimes I realized, like, I have some time, like I'm going on vacation, my computer's not going to be used, so let's run the render while I'm away and see how it's going. And it almost always worked, except that one time in Vancouver where I was looking at my phone, trying to remote in, and my computer wouldn't respond for like a day until I think it just stopped panicking. I think it just freaked out one of the frames that just gave up and just made everything panic with it. So, and then I had to reboot it, which is quite nerve-wracking because my computer sometimes wouldn't reboot properly. So, but that's a different aspect. So that's the main renders. And you're gonna notice when I was talking about comp, all the patch earlier, like I rendered all of. Thank you. I rendered. Seriously. Yeah, no, this is one of those things I hate. My hard drive, for some reason, the cable always tries to disconnect on this specific laptop. Let's see if it actually. Also, After Effects, when it discovers that something is not reachable anymore, it kind of gives up trying to get access to it anymore. So, for example, the characters are rendered separately from. So if I just disable them. Just the fact that it can disable those as layers, because I realized, like, if I want to change the character performance, I don't want to have to re-render that background plate all over again. And you can do that. For example, you're gonna render a couple of aspects separately. For example, try to find. so I had the alpha for the house. Well, I say house, kind of a weird castle that looks like a middle finger when you squint at it. But the whole idea is that you have this specific piece and then the alpha. It's basically just a black and white map. And the whole idea is that you can just put it on top of everything. And you have another mask that's how did I call it again? Because the whole idea is that you want also a character to be not in front of everything, because it's still done in 2D with that kind of comp. Let's see, how did I name it again? Oh yeah, also I had to render the hand as a separate object that I could put on top of everything else. And then you have the telescope, which is literally just a black and white map of the telescope. So I can actually just key well, not key, just mask it, so the character would be behind. And then there was that part. I think that part was just done with a bit of rough matte. Where did I name it again? Oh, I think it's just because actually the character is not even the character is not even need to be behind. It's just a reflection. So I think the reflection was. Oh, actually, it's farther away. There we go. It's basically just a z depth, and the whole idea with a z depth is that it's a map, and the whole idea is that the further things that are further away, their brightness. You're gonna look at info, for example. The brightness corresponds to a value, and the brighter it is, it's the farther it is. So, for example, the exposure, you're gonna notice. Like, for example, those values are super high, and it gets closer. For example, 5, which is, I think, 5 units, which I think is supposed to be 5 meters away from the camera. So the idea with that pass is then you just reduce the exposure to try to get something a bit more manageable. You get a curve to get just the edge like this. This one is just to conform it, and then OLM smoother, which is a morphological anti-aliasing filter, and it basically just gets, instead of just getting jagged edges like that, it basically just turns it into something more workable. It's not perfect, but the whole idea is that you can then just get the character to just be away, because instead if you just took it out, you'd basically just have the reflection on top, which it doesn't look too bad when it's dark like that. Like, you can kind of squint, it doesn't look too bad, but you know, you want to get something that looks good with all the effects. So you have the character layers, and all ideas with Twilight, when I was talking about the way that I composited the eyes, literally just copy paste the same formula, just swap the layers for Spike, and then on top of that, what you get is you just get this. And what we can do then is that, for example, this filter to smooth it out, and then you have then you're gonna have bloom effects added on top, because the whole idea is you want it to look bright, so just adding bloom on top just helps it. And then lens distortion, just to try to make it look less stiff. Some vignette for the look. Put down the exposure, change a bit the vibrance, and then this one's basically just to confirm the colors, and then you get something that looks a lot less flat as a look. And it's more in terms of personal opinion. Personally, I wanted to have something that looked a bit less flat. Instead of trying to do the 3D that will look flat to try to match the characters, I thought I'd do it backwards, and I think it makes a look that's a lot more interesting visually to work with that, because I just think the idea of trying to make stuff that doesn't look like what everything else looks like just makes just the idea of standing out that way just works better for my personal view. And also, it's quite interesting because it's a nice challenge. It's something that I wanted to have that looked different from everything else, that could be a good personal like something that would be some kind of personal improvement idea. So just having that really helped. Can I? Oh, I have 3 minutes. Do you have any questions I can answer? Yeah.
You said your Adobe Anime is compatible with vectors. Does that mean that you can import like any vectorial drawings?
Almost. So you have, for example, if you have Adobe Illustrator,
Yeah.
you're gonna have. I was gonna show. There we go. So you're gonna have, for example, in import, you're gonna have import to stage, and in import to stage, you're gonna have all the all the files you can open. So, for example, Adobe Illustrator, they finally allowed SVG files. I think it's not perfect as conversion, but if you split it in a way where it's going to be able to import it properly.
Personally, I've been working with SVG. It's not too bad.
Yeah, but I mean, it's less about SVG not working. It's mostly just the fact that Flash is not the best at reading some files. It's quite funny because you can also export a file out of Flash that you can then import in Toon Boom, and the conversion is also kind of weird. So that's why I always tell people, like, try to export it by layers so it doesn't panic. So
I do have a question about your rendering. So you basically, what you do is you render the backdrop of the scene,
Yep.
like the background of the scene separately on Blender, and then you overlay to Boom and do post-processing in Toon Boom, or
After Effects.
After Effects? Okay.
Because the key problem with Toon Boom is that it's kind of slow at rendering things. So just rendering the characters and that's it made it so much easier. And it's also the fact that
Basically, you do your character movement in Toon Boom, and then you do the post-processing /
yep.
rendering for the 2D characters in After Effects.
Yep, and I think part of it is also just the fact that you actually have, for example, if you want to preview those frames, it actually keeps those frames in memory. It actually shows you. For example, you can see the just in green, just the frames that it kept in memory, and you can just see the whole scene instead of having to do guesswork. Because Toon Boom still has that problem where it just doesn't tell you, it doesn't let you preview in that kind of interactive way. And it's my approach. There's some people that might just want to do the comp fully in Toon Boom so they can actually see the final result while being able to tinker with the animation, but it doesn't work well with that kind of 3D stuff. They did integrate some Blender and Maya functionality to render the 3D out of Toon Boom. Well, I say out of Toon Boom. It basically just calls for Maya to render in the back and then grabs back the frame. The one problem is that it doesn't keep in memory those frames.
Yeah, so you have to render it every time.
So it's kind of a waste. It doesn't matter too much if your render is very simple. And I think what they're expecting is people just doing very basic 3D environments that are made out of like 2D pieces, simple geometry, baked lighting, and for example, this kind of lighting, trying to do that on a project that you're going to re-render a couple of times, just going to be a waste. I had to actually build my own tool for that. It's quite interesting because the whole idea is that you have it's called export camera. It's kind of based on their export layout option, and the whole idea is that when you run it, I'm not gonna run it, but it creates a file that you can export as a JSON. And if you open, actually I can't do that from 4.2. Let me open up in 3.6. I hope it's not going to break because it's not in a computer it's meant for, but don't think it should be a problem. There we go. Actually, I guess I can open up the one from the map that I was covering earlier. Missing out. Missing out scenes map. So the idea with that shot is that I wanted to have everything done in a single shot, which means scripting. There we go. And I think missing file. So D and F. There we go. So the whole idea is it's called animation nodes. So you have a JSON that is basically just all the coordinates of a camera. I had to do some weird conversion to try to convert it because the format they had, the units were not matching, and somehow some of the units were in the were actually multiplied by like 2.666. And the whole idea is that you read the JSON and you, through that weird, complicated setup, you just export the coordinates to a camera that's set in Blender, and then it just keeps following the movement. And turns out it's a perfect match because the whole idea is that you then import in Toon Boom a proxy model. Like for example, I didn't work with that model from Toon Boom.
So if you build a program that exports the coordinates of your camera from Blender to Toon Boom, or
the-
to a text file, basically copy over to Toon Boom to
the other way around.
the other way around, okay, from Toon Boom to Blender.
And the model is a lot simpler from Toon Boom, but the whole idea is that I don't expect to render it. I just expect to have that as a good idea of a perspective. So for example, like there's a bunch of missing assets, but the idea that I can now work with that as a good idea of the estimate of that, and that the camera angle is gonna match as well, is a blessing.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I can just render. In this case, I rendered out the VV. The idea, it crashed. Yeah, no, I think it crashed because it's integrated graphics, but the whole idea is that I rendered it on the proper graphics card. Actually, it's gonna crash because of integrated graphics, but I can actually render it CPU mode because some of the elements I realized that the reflections were looking wonky. So what I did instead is that I took the model and just used the same settings to just render it with. So let's go back to scripting. Let's change back the directory. Yeah. And you can you have the option between the engines, so you can switch back to cycles. I'm gonna take the camera and I'm gonna put. It's quite funny too. You're gonna have in the options, for example, in viewport display, you have the passe partout. And if you put it to 1, it's going to exclude all the pixels that are outside of that. And it only works at 1. And it's really weird that they made it like that, but it's also a blessing. So, and then you can render on CPU. And I think you might be able to hear the fan ramp up on my computer. That's not meant for that kind of render at all. And the whole idea of just being able to render it separately, it also means that because Toon Boom is a program that has the same problem as Flash, it's subscription based. And subscription based means that you're gonna have to pay for one for every single computer. I think for at least for Toon Boom, I think Flash might be a bit more lenient on that. But with Toon Boom, you have one license per computer, and that's it. So whenever I have to go.
Not Creative Commons, but Creative Cloud.
Yep.
Creative Cloud.
But the whole thing is also really crazy because Toon Boom only works for one computer, but you have to activate it and deactivate it manually. So whenever I have to go on vacation, I want to bring some stuff with me, I have to disable it on my home computer, enable it on my laptop, and I can't do it remotely except if I remote into my computer. Like, yeah, sometimes I might have to ask, well, it never really happened to me, but some people, if their computer just dies, they have to basically ask the support to help them to get their computers back.
That's kind of crazy.
And the fact that since Blender is free and I can just export the coordinates out of Toon Boom, I don't have to render that on my main computer, and I have like 2 computers that are set. Of course, I call them Luna and Celestia. So you have Celestia, that's the main work computer, and the Luna that's like an almost 10 years old computer that has like an RTX 570. Like, it's not the most powerful graphics card, but for simple stuff, like, it works. And I don't have to worry, like, I can just leave it running forever while my main computer is not affected. And I forgot to bring it, but I also have a Steam Deck, and I was thinking like, and you can actually render out of Blender out of it.
Yeah.
last holiday season, I had my Steam Deck, and I realized I wanted to do some stuff, and my Steam Deck has better graphics than this laptop. So I just started just putting the Steam Deck on the side, and I realized like I'm gonna do the main work on my laptop, gonna be done, put it on flash drive, put it in there. Just told my parents like, if the Steam Deck is making weird sounds during the night, it's normal. It's my fault. So, also, is it crashed or? No, it's not crashed. It's just yeah, it's just that slow on a CPU, and you also have yep.
I have a question. It's not related to this.
Okay.
Wait, are you done with what you were saying before?
Oh no, it was done. Like, go ahead.
Okay. So you showed in Adobe Animate an animation with Luna, and you said something about how you don't completely rely on using tweens.
Well, actually, it's less about relying on using tweens. Is that you can't just rely on just using tweens. It's a good starter. Like the whole idea with the tween is just takes a beginning position in the position, and literally just goes from one to the other, and that's it. You can have, for example, with Flash, they call it them guides. So you put up the 2 points, and you draw a curve that ties the 2 points, and you said instead of going from here to here, you're gonna go like here. It's not perfect, but it works. But the thing is that then you have to set guides. So if you are in a hurry, what you can do is that you set a tween between two positions, and then in the middle of that, you don't even need to change anything. You just click and drag, and you put it as a position. So it just keeps doing that movement, and it creates a new keyframe in the middle of the tween. It's also pretty cool if you want to do animation in twos and you have a movement that's supposed to be linear in a way. You just do your tween, you create keyframes in the middle on twos, and you just get rid of all the other ones. And then, for example, if you want to add some chaos, you can work around that. It's a good starting point. It's just the problem is that with those tweens that they were very mechanical. So if you want to put some more, if you want to put more energy to that, you have to work around that. Toon Boom also works with tweens as well. The whole idea with that is that, for example, if you look at, let's find a good one. For example, you're gonna have some tweens here, just to try to deform it, and you're gonna notice that there's tweens every few frames to try to get it more, some kind of more interesting movement. So, did I lock the neck? I think I did. Yeah, actually, let's see if I can. Neck. I did not lock the neck. I did not lock the. Oh, okay, that's a slight problem that you have with the way that Toon Boom handles it. Let's see, can I... Yeah, that's a little problem. Sometimes Toon Boom doesn't like displaying deformers if it's at a very specific angle. So I'm just gonna take everything and just move it around. So I'm gonna put this, set it 3D, and set 90. There we go. And I think should allow display. No. Oh, okay. I'm an idiot. That's even dumber than that. It's I set a retime. So if I disable the retime, there we go. So, for example, you have the deformer, and if you look at the layer where it's set, then look at the function graph. The whole idea with the graph is that it actually gives you what kind of motion that you're going to expect. So reset view and conform. And the idea is that instead of just having something that goes in just a straight direction, you can actually see some of the movement actually goes. So it feels a bit less robotic just by the fact that it actually follows a different curve. So you add a bit of chaos. For example, just the way that, since, for example, if she's gonna go with the hoof, and she goes down, and then the rest of the body follows. So the body follows, and then the head also follows. And then you have, for example, where she goes like that with her head, just to give it a bit more personality. So, and then you can add some extra layers. What they do with the show usually is that they add some extra layers. For example, just putting some well-timed blinks, or they're going to add some extra motion for limbs that are going to be slightly offset in time, just to try to get something that feels less robotic. Because when you think of robots, you're going to think of just all the movements set at once like this. So it really helps in that way. Yeah.
Also, what were you talking about before about color override in After Effects?
Oh, okay. So it's a node called color override. I'm gonna give you a good demonstration of how it works. It's called insert filter color correct. It's called color override here, and
In After Effects or in
Toon Boom.
Okay.
And the whole idea is that then it works with index colors, unlike Flash. So every single color is tied to a specific value that you then paint with. So, for example, if I want to have, I want to change the coat color, all of it is tied to that override. And it's quite interesting because what you can do then is, for example, if I want an output that's outside of the color override, I don't have to worry about it. So, for example, one of the tricks I found, it's kind of backwards, but the idea is that you take the color of the outline and you set it to black. And then what you do is you do blending. You just subtract it to the original value. And what it gives you is pretty crazy. So here's the outline. I'm going to plug this one up. There we go. So here you have just the outline in black. This is basically just because of preview just doesn't know how to do what to do with subtract. But when you render it, since you subtract value that's completely at zero, when I say subtract, I'm talking about doing math with colors. So you're gonna have the value, for example, here that has the color. For example, best example I can think of is think of white as 1 and black as 0. And here, when you subtract 0 to everything, because you're going to subtract, for example, that purple with another purple that's exactly the same, so it's going to go to 0. But if you subtract a value minus 0, you're going to just keep the value. So by doing that subtract, you just isolate the color itself. And that way I just have the map with just those colors. And if I want, for example, in my specific case, the reason why I want the outline is that I want to isolate it to get some really cool rim light on top of it. You can also just isolate it, just get the outline. For example, if you want to have, for example, you want to darken the outline with some kind of gradient by blurring it. You can do that as well. If you want some crazy things where it's just the outline and nothing else, you also have the option. It's lots of possibilities just with that option. And you use the same color override, for example, for the eyes. So as I was showing, there's the eye position. And they look pretty funny when you negate that subtract, but then you get the value here. And it's basically just the same RGB values. So
Okay. Do you have a social media where you post your animations?
yep, I got Twitter, Minty_root. YouTube is literally just Minty Root. Blue Sky as well, just Minty Root. Like this.
Okay.
And it's mostly My Little Pony stuff, but hopefully next year I'm going to have some non-pony stuff to also talk about. Just that I don't have much I can really talk about besides that right now. I'm really excited because animation is quite interesting because it's a lot of possibilities of things you can do because the tools are incredible. And a lot of people think of, unfortunately, a lot of people think of animation as a very stiff thing that you can't really work around. You're gonna have some people who just swear by 2D or swear by 3D and they can't really think of something as middle. And then they see Across the Spider-Verse and they panic because they've never seen anything like that, even though we've seen that before. It's not like they invented the idea of 2D and 3D working together. you're gonna have to just the idea that you're gonna have, for example, with My Little Pony, the one thing that really kept striking me visually was the fact that it went with very thick outlines, but with colors. Because you often see animated shows with thin black outlines, and sometimes they'd have thick black outlines, but they would rarely try to go with colors. And what they did, they actually tried to get that kind of color with something that was very muted or very dim. They're basically just outlines that are barely visible. And I'm thinking, like, you want the striking outlines, and I think with that they actually went just the perfect amount. Like, it's dark enough so you can see them, but and they're thick enough, but they don't they're not too dark, so you don't lose the character appeal. And they really look weirdly soft when you look at them. And that's one of the things that influenced my style. And when I realized that I could actually take the outline, isolate it, and brighten it just on one side, you can actually get a cool rim light effect. And it's one of those things, because we were always talking about rim lights with when it comes to 3D. So just the idea that I'd be able to replicate that with 2D like that, and have something that looked a little more stylized